Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening to everyone joining us from different parts of the world. You've joined the next installment of the Sitecore webinars, and this talk is going to be entitled How Design and UX Can Be Used to Display Complex Data in a Beautiful Way for a Better Customer Experience. We're just going to give people a couple minutes just to join before we get started. So if hopefully you've got a comfortable chair, perhaps a cup of coffee, or if you're joining us in the evening, perhaps a little tipple, and you're safely sitting somewhere in the world, and you and your family are well. To kick things off, just whilst we're waiting, we will have a look at just a quick question of where everyone is joining us from in the world. So let me share my screen, and then you'll be able to respond. There you go. Okay. So what we're going to be doing today as part of the session is we're going to be using something called Slido. Hopefully you've used it before and you know how this works, but if not, it's very simple. You can just join from slido.com or sli.do. And then when you get to the home page, and that should load pretty quickly, you can just type in the code Sitecore, and that will then help you join this particular session. There's going to be a couple questions as we go throughout. So just to keep everyone on their toes and make sure everyone is still with us. This is a webinar, so it's to be expected that you might also be doing some other things as well, but hopefully we can keep you engaged enough to want to stay active. So pleasure to have everyone joining us. Looks like we've got someone joining us from Belgium, just joined us, someone from New York, and then we've got two people, it looks like, or a number of people from London and Lisbon. And someone joining us from The Hague. Welcome from The Hague, fantastic city with the world's most beautiful painting, The Girl with the Bird Earring. I don't know actually know how you pronounce the museum, but something like the Mauritshuis. Great. Someone joining us from Zurich, Switzerland. Hello to you. Hope you've got some beautiful surroundings whilst we're all locked up in our homes. Great. Okay, well, we'll get started. And as I said, today's talk is called How Design and UX Can Be Used to Display Complex Data in a Beautiful Way for a Better Customer Experience. Incredibly long-winded of saying really what we want to be able to do is create effective and useful digital products. So who am I? My name is Shaun Miller, and I'm a digital experience consultant at a company called Codehouse. We're a digital experience agency, and we have offices based in London, Sydney, and Colombo in Sri Lanka. And my background, just briefly, is that I studied technology innovation for a time at MIT Sloan School, and previously, before Codehouse, worked at Deloitte in their technology strategy and architecture division. And so I've been thinking about building technology products for a long time, and how to use digital products as a way of evolving a company's ability to serve its customers and also its own business better. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So what do we mean by effective websites? And at Codehouse, we interchange between this idea of websites and digital products. Typically, a website is a digital product. And we think that shift in mindset towards a product rather than a website, which we've had for the last 25 years, helps in terms of the way that companies structure their teams around developing these types of solutions. So at Codehouse, we're structured in two sort of axes: strategy and optimization teams, which help our customers and our clients work out where should their organization go from a digital perspective, and how can they keep improving towards that destination and navigating as that destination might change. And then we use the tools of design and development to create those solutions to help them hit those goals. Before we get started, though, I just wanted to say this talk is dedicated to the content management teams around the world that are producing and publishing content that's incredibly vital and helping all of us to stay safe. So that's a thanks to them before we get started. I think it's kind of they've been unmentioned in the news, so I thought I'd make that clear and thank them now. So what is a website good for? This will be a quick intro. I mean, these are things that we all know, that the idea of exchanging information, so helping our customer make a more informed purchase. So this is from the brilliant Sitecore website. So a very classic example of how a website is showing and displaying information. Obviously, there's personalization baked into how this experience is delivered. And then there's also the idea that you can communicate directly with your customers, and that your customers can communicate directly with yourselves and with the business, be that synchronous via live chat or asynchronous by filling in a form. The web and a website enables these different types of communication channels. The thing that we're really excited about, and that what we want to talk about today in particular, and our experience working with one of our customers, APM Terminals, is this idea of functional tasks. The ability to use the web and your digital products to serve your customers in a better way, to enable them to actually do tasks that are part of their workflow, their day-to-day work. So more of that later. And then the other side of what a website can enable you to do is also to sell products as well. So this is me looking to buy some pair of socks. I actually didn't check out on this one because £13 is pretty much my annual budget for socks. So I didn't go for this pair, but they do look pretty good. So our agenda for the next 24 minutes is to think about what does it mean to create effective digital products. And we'll be talking a bit about our experience working with APM Terminals and some of the inspiring work that they're doing to help their customers and improve the way their business delivers value. And the way that we think about that at Codehouse is through these 3 steps or pillars. So that's defining, designing, and refining. Luckily enough, they rhyme, so it works for us, but also it works as a way of thinking about the process of delivering digital products. So APM Terminals, I mentioned them a couple of times already. They are a subsidiary of Maersk, the big shipping company, who you might have seen some of their containers on the motorways around the world or on train tracks. But APM Terminals effectively does the role of moving containers from a container ship onto land, and then passing those containers then into the onward journey to make sure that we are able as consumers to get all of the valuable goods that we are demanding. And so we've been working with them for a number of years, but in 2018, we went through the process of redesigning their website from the ground up, and this is the homepage. So all of this process of defining, designing, and refining has worked and has been a process that has enabled us to achieve some success in the last number of years with APM Terminals and some other customers. But COVID-19, as the reason why we're all joining this webinar from our homes, and the reason why at some point you might hear my new puppy in the background barking, is because we're facing a period of time without kind of drawing too fine a point in it, that is just different to anything we've experienced before. And the points that I want to convince you of today is that all businesses, even the most physical, such as APM Terminals, or those businesses that require human interaction to create the experience and the service promise that your company offers to your customers, even those, the most physical, the ones that need the most hand-holding and human interaction, even those can create digital products to improve the way their customers experience their services or the way that their business operates. And the point around COVID-19 is that, and you'll see throughout this presentation, we have a few of these sort of pink bars jumping in across the top, a bit like many websites you'll see across the web at the moment. But COVID-19 presents an opportunity to push through some types of innovations and changes that maybe wouldn't have been possible before. And there's just a different type of appetite. That's not to say things won't go back to how they might have been before, but there's definitely something different happening. So first of all, looking at defining, there's this Indian sort of tale that goes back at least a couple millennia, this idea that there's a number of blind men all who suddenly come across this elephant, and they all feeling different parts of the elephant, and through their own individual experiences, someone touching the trunk, someone touching the tail, someone touching a leg, they all are able to individually describe what they think an elephant is. And sometimes the definition of trying to create a new digital product is a bit like that, because we've all got our own nuances, our own sort of viewpoint on a particular problem. And so one of the challenges in a COVID-19 world where we're all working remotely is that becomes even harder in some ways. And we'll talk a bit more about that in the rest of this talk. So in terms of like the shift that's happening, and this is a recent article from the New York Times, at least in the healthcare sector, which is famous and notorious for its challenges around bureaucracy and pushing through innovation. The idea of telemedicine has been something that's been talked about for many years, but only now, at least in the UK, some rapid changes are happening. And that's because there's suddenly this desperate need for it to happen. But that's kind of the opportunity there, that the kind of question to all of us in the audience is, well, what are some of the things that may not have been the appetite or the risk or the fear may not have kind of been too high previously, but now we see there's maybe an opportunity to push forward and use digital as an enabler for our business in a way that probably there might have been some resistance beforehand. And on the consumer side, this is some research that has been done by McKinsey & Company. They've done a number of surveys from around the world. This is just from France. But this is just showing the sudden increase in the level of demand for digital services and digital products. In blue, that's showing people who've never used one of these services before, and then the lighter blue is people who are now using those services even more, kind of ranging from grocery delivery through to telemedicine or online personal training. So this is just a snapshot, but the message here is that there is an opportunity to do more with digital and more with our websites than just that kind of first exchanging of information. What are some of the functional tasks that can be delivered and designed to help our colleagues and our customers be better at what they're doing? So on the business side, the classic thing we've always seen is that we need to define our business needs and what the user needs, and good UX and good products balance those two things together. So the first question that we always ask with any customer, and we ask this with APM Terminals, is what's the problem we're trying to solve? And then the other side is, well, when we're trying to work out on a particular problem, who needs to be in the room whilst we're shaping these requirements? And then from a kind of more logistics perspective, how do we capture and shape those requirements? How do we get from this kind of sort of broader ideas of a particular business problem or customer opportunity and get that into something that looks like a feasible product that we could deliver? So with APM Terminals, that sometimes looks like working on design sprints. This is from last July, working in their office in Maidenhead. And this is a 5-day process for defining a particular type of business problem. But in the COVID-19 scenario, how does that change from not being able to do it in a physical room, but what are some of the ways that we can still do that remotely? So quick poll. So this is just a question to everyone in terms of your experience with remote workshops. Looks like someone's been fast on the trigger, but how would you rate your experience with remote workshops? How do they compare to in-person sessions? So we would say like a 5 is probably, I think they're actually pretty much just the same. Or a 1 would be, well, they're so horrific, I would never even dream of doing a remote workshop, versus 10, which is they're so much better than even having to meet people in person and kind of work through these things together. So we'll give a few seconds for people to put in some responses. Okay, so that's interesting. So we're definitely seeing some, so we're seeing an average of 4.2. A couple more responses, all sort of in around that middle bracket, which is to be expected. I definitely thought we would see the kind of on the lower end of the 5 mark. And that's what I want to talk about today, is some tips and techniques for how to improve the experience of doing remote workshops and how we can improve their effectiveness as well. So we think about the 3 T's of hosting remote workshops. So the first is team, second timing, and then tools. So in terms of team, I mean, all of this will also applies to when doing physical workshops. This is some of the sort of planning and thinking that needs to go into them. But if we're defining some business problems, we need to be understanding who has the most knowledge to be able to answer some of the questions we might have. So that could be the frontline member of staff who works in a call center who has the most number of interactions with the customer around a particular problem. But that could also be the head of product, or the head of finance, or the head of credit control. And so depending on their level of seniority, that does necessitate or dictates the type of workshop structures. And we'll come to that in a moment. But understanding who needs to be in a workshop is key. And then thinking about timing. So one thing that our experience has shown us is that if it was a physical workshop and you thought you'd need 4 hours, well, the reality is in a virtual workshop, the 4 hours won't work. So you have to think about ways of how you can shorten that workshop or split it up. So if it's a 4-hour workshop, how could it be done as 2 2-hour workshops, or how could it be done, and this is the point around synchronous versus asynchronous. So if it's a 4-hour workshop, could some of the work happen offline before the session, or some of it happen then after the session that you do together as a whole group? And so some of the ways that we're seeing working is that we would have an introduction that we do together as a wider group, and typically workshops that need interaction, any more than 8 on a call actually makes it very difficult. So we introduce the topic as some of the brief for what we're trying to capture. Then some of the work might happen offline, and then in terms of tools, we're using a tool called Miro quite a lot, but there's also another sort of whiteboarding tool called Mural, and a number of others that enable this asynchronous collaboration in one virtual whiteboard. And it's not structured like a Google Doc, which means it's actually quite easy to move around thoughts and prioritize different points. And we also use Figma a lot to then start refining some of those ideas into some design concepts as we move into the next stage. So the 3 T's of hosting remote workshops are essential in terms of thinking about how to structure and get the most out of those sessions. Because actually, in my experience, they can be more effective, because in some ways, firstly, you can get more contributions from people who aren't necessarily on the same time zone. We had a workshop a couple of weeks ago with people joining from Texas, London, and Sydney and Singapore, so across multiple time zones. And actually, the ability to get an equal level of contribution from those different people actually made the workshop far more valuable than it could have been otherwise if it was just held in person. So from a user needs perspective, one of the things that we see often is this, the kind of off-quote, this is Dilbert saying, we know our customers well. But the research from Capgemini says that 75% of organizations think they know their customers well, they're customer-centric, but from a consumer perspective, actually only 30% think that the companies they buy from understand them. And so that leaves this empathy gap. And so APM Terminals, they've been great around actually needing to speak to those end users and understand their needs and have those conversations. But some of it starts from doing surveys and analyzing the web analytics that we have already, looking at customer service logs, so what kind of feedback are we getting directly through the website, but also on calls. And all of those things are a great start, but we need to go deeper. And often that means actually having conversations. And as I say, APM Terminals have been good at doing that in the 70 terminals that they have around the world, capturing the different needs of their customers and their users in those different locations, which actually in some cases have quite differing needs based on the context in which the user is working in. And in the case of COVID-19 and the kind of situation we find ourselves in, we won't be having these conversations as face-to-face conversations, but inevitably they're going to be over Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts, but they're still so valuable to do. Even if at some points you've got children running in or they've got a dog jumping on their head, it's incredibly valuable work to be done. So this is just a very quick question. In terms of just a quick check-in to see how everyone's doing. This is just to see how everyone's getting on in terms of if you're managing to focus and stay on touch with the poll and what we're getting through. So it looks like from the responses we've seen that someone is actually just enjoying the sound of my voice, which is a lovely compliment. So thank you very much. And actually, it would have also been fine if you were also struggling. You're trying to listen, but also struggling to manage something else. So this is another quick quiz question. just around from a digital perspective, if anyone knows what this chart is showing. So, so for all of those who have joined the quiz, what does that chart refer to? So I can just show it again quickly. What does this chart refer to? Give you a few seconds. Okay. Good. Okay. Well, 50% of you are bang on. That chart does show the number of daily downloads of House Party in the UK. And interestingly, I mean, as we've talked about in terms of this drive and increased use of digital products, House Party is a classic example of how that's happened. But even the chart shows that there has been a diminishing number of new daily downloads of the app itself. And Luke takes the prize right at the top. I did go quite quickly on the first question. So moving back into the designing part of our process. So when we're working with APM Terminals, one of the things that we wanted to make sure, and we do this with all of our customers, is just to think about what are some of the opportunities to create delight and excitement around the product experience. So this is just taking inspiration from when I was recently getting pet insurance for Bailey, my new puppy. And what was beautiful about this, as even whilst during its loading time, there's some delightful animation of some paw prints. And so when we were designing this vessel schedule, so which basically enables the users of the website to know when ships are coming into particular ports or particular terminals, we added this moment of delight when they get to see a ship coming in and seeing the direction of its travel. So in this case, it's coming into Port Elizabeth or Los Angeles, depending on the specific terminal. And this, whilst it's kind of delightful, also enables quick and easy understanding of the data that they're looking at. So one of the things that happens when you start moving into developing more functional tools, particularly as was the case with APM Terminals, is that they have a lot of data, and so there's this opportunity to present and need to present information to the customer where actually there's quite a lot of information to be showing. And so this is one case of where we've this is from the track and trace functionality, where someone can look at and check the status of their containers and see when they're ready to be picked up. And this is the desktop view. But one of the things that we had to do, and we have to be very careful about and pay careful attention to, is how would that look on mobile? So it's one thing, and what we wanted to do with this view of the data is enable it to be sympathetic to the workflow of the users who are desktop bound. So the dispatch manager, who actually is going to be typically potentially exporting this data and putting it into a CSV. But in the case of, say, the truck driver, what does that mean to have something that can be useful when they're driving? And I think there's lots of parallels to this in other types of businesses. And so I kind of asked the question, what could that mean for you in terms of if you were trying to present data to some of your customers or even some of your internal colleagues? What are some of the different modalities that they have whilst trying to engage with that data? So just as a very brief little exercise, working with my colleague Rory, who's a UX UI designer, we came up with a small little activity based on some recent experience that we had going to a hardware store, where now the mode of shopping is either delivery, if they're still doing it. In many cases, when it's large items, they're not delivering. So this kind of idea of park and collect or click and collect. So we mocked up this example for the view that a store manager might have, and all of the data that's in this design is actually being directly linked from a Google Sheets to enable a more dynamic design process, so that we are actually working with structured data as part of creating this type of interface. So this is the desktop view, kind of similar to what we showed with the APM Terminals example. And what we were wondering is how would we then translate this to be useful for the store manager who's trying to see all of the car parking spots, so that's kind of zone A and zone B and all the individual spots, And for each spot, when a particular delivery or kind of pickup is happening, there's a 15-minute window when the customer has to be checked in, and then a 15-minute window when the product can be brought to their car. And so we were wondering, well, what could that look like on mobile? Because if the store manager is out and about during the day, they're probably not going to have access to their desktop view. So we need to be thinking, well, what are some ways that this would be, what are some of the things that the manager would want to be doing whilst out and about? And that's kind of how we then start to think about designing that mobile view of interface. So in terms of some of the tasks that the store manager might be interested in doing whilst they're on their mobile device, what are some thoughts that people have in terms of the kind of the most important tasks they might want to be engaging with? Okay, so we've got a few ideas here, and it definitely looks like seeing what space and resource availability is the top pick, which we totally agreed with on that. And so what we do when we think about moving, kind of designing mobile experiences with data, is we focus on the now. So again, we like to use these kind of models of kind of thinking when we're building out these experiences. So the 3 N's. So thinking about we're trying to focus on the now. What is the particular task that someone, in this case the store manager, might be interested in doing in that very moment? And then rather than in that flat view of the desktop data that we saw, everything in one big table, how can we nest data to enable this relationship to almost like burrowing down to find out more information as you kind of go through the process? And then how can we do small subtle nudges using animations and touch gestures to kind of make the experience a bit smoother for the user and help them discover the data that's nested within the interface? So this is just a very quick view of our kind of first take of what that experience could look like. So as you can see here, there's the store manager is able to they're at the start of the day. It's 9 a.m. They can kind of see how busy the day is looking in terms of that kind of mountain range, and then they can click in at specific slots and see how their staff are being allocated to particular tasks. And then also they can rush through the day and kind of see where jump to those busy points, even see how their resourcing is working out. And then if they want to then update and manage a member of staff's resourcing, adjust a particular booking, they can also do that as well. So a very simple sort of case study, but interesting. We think it's interesting just to explore this idea of going from a really flat, big view, which is kind of can work on desktop. We still think some of these principles apply, and how you can transform that to make it highly useful whilst on the mobile experience. So this last point. So moving on to refining. So there's 3 things that this section of refining hinges on. The first, from a design perspective, is what we call what's called a design system. So the idea of design system is something that can be referred to and is almost a living. The idea of a style guide is something that people will be familiar with in terms of being a reference document for how you evolve and kind of use a brand's design elements. But what a design system does is it kind of takes it to the next level, and it is a structured document that enables, and as you can see in this case, we have buttons and fonts and colors, and all those can be referenced dynamically to create further design experiences. And the point here is that what we want to do to create good experiences is have consistency of visual language, and so the design system enables that to happen. And so in the case where you may have multiple digital products, by having a unified design system, it means actually all of those different products can have the same visual and interaction language. And so, and this measuring outcomes is something that we'll all have heard a multitude of times, but having an engagement, so a measurement framework to identify the types of measures that we would want to have whilst tracking user behavior, and that's everything through from engagement and from the kind of tasks that we were just talking about, these very functional orientated products. We want to be measuring the number of task successes or task failures to understand whether the products that we're building are being effective. And all of those, that measurement framework should then be kind of compiled into a series of dashboards relevant by persona or relevant by kind of the particular focus of that framework. And by having this dashboard, it means you have this ongoing visibility of what's happening with the products that you're developing. And what APM Terminals have done very successfully is also just enable the ease of getting feedback from users, and in this case, using Delight to get some feedback from the end users and understand from a snapshot feedback perspective what's their NPS score. And I mean, the ideal situation when you're designing a process and a product, but also when it's gone into the live environment, is to do face-to-face user testing. This is from a previous project, but inevitably right now, obviously we want to be producing new products, but this type of testing isn't going to be feasible. So there's a number of alternative opportunities and options, from the kind of more purely remote testing, which is something like user testing, user brain, or maze in the bottom right, which is if you set up your tests and they can help you find your testees, or in the case of using Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams, where you've got the participants that you want to be engaging with, and that you're having more of a conversation and a dialogue, and you're watching their screen whilst they're interacting with your product. This is incredibly essential to do as part of releasing any new product into the world. Because as you do that, what we want to be doing is having this continual focus on renewing the old, so looking at what we've already created and how can it be optimized and improved, but also thinking about what comes next, what other bits of value which loops us back round to the top of the refining process and the defining process, which is what else can we do to help our colleagues and our customers have a better experience. This is just one very quick example from APM Terminals website. So this is, as I mentioned, they have over 70 terminals around the world. This is currently the users starting on their Los Angeles page or area of the website, and the user then wants to be able to change location and visit another terminal. And this was what we had done in the original build, but through the processes that we've just discussed in terms of how do you understand if something's working or not, through multiple different number of sources, we've got the intuition and the understanding backed up by data that actually there's an opportunity to improve that experience. And recently this new switch locator interface has just gone live, and the feedback already has been really positive. So this is a perfect example of how an interface is actually, and a product is never done. It's something that has to constantly evolve and improve to the point at which it's working and the flows are effective for your users. So this is a really, really nice example, and we've been really proud of the types of updates and changes that we've been continually making with APM Terminals to improve the overall user experience. So that's been a whistle-stop tour through how we go about creating effective experience digital products, and how APM Terminals has been incredibly successful at doing that. So going through this defining and designing and refining process, and thinking about the 3 T's of when you're creating these virtual workshops and trying to gather feedback and input into shaping what kind of digital products we're going to build, thinking about the team, the timing, and the tools, as well as from your kind of creating and designing the experiences, thinking about those 3 ends of what's happening now to the user when they're using the product on mobile. How can we nest data appropriately, and how can we nudge them to understand how to use the experience effectively? So hopefully that's not too much information to have picked up in one 30-minute session, but I would be very happy to answer any questions now, but also I appreciate that we're actually running a couple minutes over, so would be very happy to receive any questions offline as well. I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can. So thank you very much.